Amazing ingenuity, a sense of progression, and environments that force you to adapt are just three of the many things Ghost of Tabor has to offer. But while I love how enjoyable this game is, I can't help but notice the many things holding this game back from being quite possibly the best release of the year. I'm not exaggerating, this game has that much potential, but as the old cliche goes, all that glitters isn't gold. Let's talk about why that is, starting with the more obvious reasons. Now, this game is an extraction shooter, which means when you dive into a match, your goal is to grab some good loot and get out before you find yourself at the business end of someone else's loot. The most common place you'll find said loot isn't like other games where it could be on a shelf or scattered around the floors inside buildings. Ghost of Tabor takes an uncommon approach with supply boxes scattered around every map. They come in different shapes and sizes, holding randomized loot in a way that's seemingly inspired by loot boxes. And this is a problem. Not for gambling reasons, but because these boxes look terrible. It's not always immediately obvious which way these boxes open from, which can create some pretty awkward situations. To make matters worse, it doesn't help how inconsistent the grab points feel, but we're talking about looks right now, and while we're on the topic of graphics, overall these visuals are noticeably lacking. Many modern VR titles have a blend of good and bad visuals, but I struggle to find any good non-screen visuals here, with the exception of some guns. Have to give credit where it's due though, the lackluster graphics aren't as noticeable as you'd think. Something about the blend of looting and surviving makes everything short of the grass here look relatively easy to ignore, and that's quite the feat. All things considered, for a game with subpar visuals, this game is incredibly fun, and this isn't the only case this game both impresses and disappoints me. First off, just getting the options menu to open in-game was a struggle in itself. It was bound to the menu button on the left controller, but if you're not playing this game through virtual desktop, you probably won't face an issue like this. Probably. But after a quick Reddit search, I solved the problem by remapping the controls through Steam. Now, this problem could have been solved sooner if not for this incredibly unintuitive body slot design. It's immediately clear there are slots for your primary and secondary weapons, but this gear icon, this universal symbol for settings, kept me occupied for longer than I'd care to admit. After yet another quick Reddit dive, I learned that this slot is seemingly exclusive for shotgun shell pouches and katanas. Learning that really irked me for some reason. What do you guys think of paid DLC and early access games? Leave a comment below and subscribe because we have a lot to talk about and I'd hate for you to forget as we dive into some of the better aspects of the options in this game. Namely that there are a lot of them. Glossing over audio not giving you too much to work with, there really are a lot of options to work with here. Graphical settings are fully customizable, giving you control down to pixel density. Full kudos for that one. You also have options for hand smoothing and virtual gunstock support, which is great if you have jittery hands or for games that are overly sensitive to input. If virtual gunstocks aren't your thing, then physical gunstock support is a thing too, with options to calibrate them along with your height and your heads-up display. The latter could use an update though, seeing as the one preset specific to my headset for the HUD felt a bit unnatural. You have a lot of options here and they could be better, but let's switch gears and talk about the meat and potatoes of this game. You can't have an extraction shooter without extractions and shooting, so I'll start with the guns, and I'd say in terms of functionality, they're as innovative as any great VR FPS. The ability to pull out a magazine while holding another for a quick swap reload is nothing short of impressive. These are exactly the kinds of innovations I love seeing in VR because small things like these enhance the experience in ways games like Call of Duty or Battlefield could never. The gun customization options here are abundant and it goes beyond the guns. I'm very impressed with how Ghost of Tabor does gear customization. The ability to place pouches on a vest, then place said vest on your person is exactly the kind of stuff VR dreams are made of. It's the kind of thing everyone should get to experience, but at the time of writing, this early access title costs $25 US. I understand that development costs money, but I'm torn because while this game has so much potential, the development decisions themselves are questionable at best. While the dev team's desire to crack down on bad actors is admirable, namely with their push towards revamping their anti-cheat measures, the lack of action towards fixing the plague of bugs in this game is, in a word, embarrassing. From the outside looking in, new features are constantly being added to the game, while game-breaking bugs go unfixed for months, almost a year at a time. I actually encountered one myself and learned how the bots behave when you don't see them. Granted, all of this information in the scope of an early access title could be irrelevant whenever and if ever this game fully releases, but if nothing else, this game's mechanics hits the nail on the head when it comes to the concept of extraction shooters. The main driving force behind the concept, though, is the theme. It's hard to make sense of what you're doing and why you're doing it without a backdrop, but Ghost of Tabor has you covered. While there is no active in-game story, the backdrop revolves around a conflict taking place in the Tabor region. You have different maps you can play on within this region, but the backdrop does a good job explaining why there are armed NPCs running around. When you launch the game for the first time, you're expected to choose between two factions, the Volk, who overthrew Russia and seem to have an agenda of their own, or the private military company aka the Ghost, being paid by NATO to stabilize the region. These factions have little to do with who you'll be facing off against in matches when it comes to players, but the third faction, called the Phoenix, are the NPCs or Tabor residents who've had enough of your crap and want you gone. As far as themes go, this one isn't bad and fits within the scope of an extraction shooter. It'd make more sense if the two-player factions were actually factions and not just unused for the sake of pushing a backstory, but again, not bad as far as themes go. The audio could use some notable improvements though. It's hard to tell if crouching actually makes a difference because your footsteps remain the same volume to you whether you're sitting or standing, and this can make it difficult to tell if you're actually being stealthy. I've read up on this and some players say you become quieter when crouching while others say the exact opposite and it doesn't function as intended. My own playtest can't draw a conclusion on this one, so I'll leave it floating, but needless to say, at the very least it's confusing and definitely needs addressing, but it's no more confusing than the coughing. The first time I heard coughing, it startled me because I thought someone had gotten a drop on me, but it turns out I was just thirsty. Throat clearing and coughing sounds are just how this game lets you know you're thirsty, but before looking into it, I had no idea as to whether this was audible to other players or not. These and many other audio cues in the game are in the air as it's generally unclear as to what can and can't be heard by enemy players or NPCs. That said, everything mentioned has a noticeable impact on immersion, and this is normally the part where I'd score the individual categories we talked about, but this is an early access title. After some careful thought, I don't think it'd be appropriate or fair for me to give an incomplete game a score, but you better believe if Ghost of Tabor releases in anything near its current state, it would get a 2 out of 6 at best. There are games I would recommend though, so check out my other reviews if you're curious.